So before, I'm going to say a few words here before I ask my esteemed panelists to tell you more about where they're coming from. I do not run a hyperlocal site. I am I'm director of community outreach for a community newspaper. That's my new thing this year, putting what I learned last year during my fellowship on engagement to work in a newsroom. But my experience will not be at all what would work for you. And one of the main points I want to get across is that what works for you might not work at all for the person sitting next to you. I set out last fall to try to define what journalists meant when they talked about community engagement, and learned very quickly that it meant something different to all of them, and that instead of being frustrated by that, I should learn to sort of put them into types and categorize it and be strategic about what works, but accept that your relationship with your community is going to be very different depending on the mission of your publication, what your community needs, what you most hope to accomplish, what niche you fill. At its core, I consider engagement to be a focus on the audience and an enthusiasm for what role the community can play in what you do. I'm a firm believer in the fact that that journalists are really good at the craft of journalism, but if nobody sees what they do, we really need to stop patting ourselves on the back about the great journalism we do and focus on who it's actually intended for and whether those people find it. I think we can't afford not to be focusing on those interactions and on testing what works. So I'm going to come back really quickly to this idea of measurement, of knowing with each project, maybe not even for your publication, maybe it has to be at the story level. Who is this for? What would success look like for the project overall and for how this helps my relationship with my community? So as we talk about some different strategies here and what engagement could mean for you, I want you to approach it from a perspective of what am I trying to accomplish overall, and what am I doing today in relationship with my community that is helping me fulfill that mission? And I hope that we'll stay very, very practical, because engagement means absolutely nothing if you don't walk out knowing what you might try in your newsroom on Monday. So I'm going to pass it off to my panel here, and they're going to tell you where they're coming from, where they work, and how their approach to community engagement is dependent on their mission. Michael, you want to go first, or Denise, or Andre?
Michael, I think, decided
Michael,
to
go
go
ahead.
first.
I thought I was going last. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Wood-Lewis from Vermont, and I'm really glad to be here today. I've been learning a lot. I'm from frontporchforum.com, and I am not a journalist. We do not do journalism on our website. But if you ask folks in our area what's one of the top places you get local news, they will say frontporchforum.com. We host a regional network of online neighborhood forums. And we have traction to die for. It's incredible. In our area of about 100,000 households, we have 30,000 members. And we reach about 2/3 of those members every day. And further, our content comes solely from our members. And it's not just the same three guys over and over and over. It's a wide variety of our members contribute, because each of them is speaking up in their own small online neighborhood space with clearly identified non-anonymous neighbors. So it's a different model, and we don't see engagement as something to think about later. As I think we were talking about once, the frosting on the cake, it's really the meat and potatoes of what we do. And so I'll leave it at that, but I'm looking forward to learning more through this panel.
So Michael, before we move on, could you what is the mission of Front Porch Forum?
Yeah, our mission is and we are organized as a for-profit, consider ourselves a mission-driven for-profit. In the land of Ben and Jerry's, you can get away with that. But we are our mission is to help neighbors connect and build community. And that's written down in lots of different places. And for myself and my employees, we think about that every day.
Thank you. Andre?
Hello, everybody. My name's Natta, and I am the station master for The Terminal, which is a community news site based in Birmingham, Alabama. We are one of the oldest community news sites in the Southeast. We started in March of 2007. Our mission is to serve as a platform to have a conversation about news, events, and people in Birmingham, Alabama. If you currently visit The Terminal, which you may not be able to do right now because our server is down, you would not see that as the current mission statement. It's a variation of what it once was, and that's partially because it's been a ever-changing experience, and it's really from getting some feedback from our community. When I started the site, the idea was that there was a void in the city in terms of having those conversations. We were really good about fighting about Alabama versus Auburn, but we really weren't good about knowing exactly why we were having debates or why there were problems with our sewer debt crisis or with transportation. And so it was a good opportunity to take my background. I am a former economic development professional. When I first moved to Birmingham, I was their senior Main Street coordinator. So it was very easy to go ahead and take those connections and those relationships and apply them to help explain why we were having why these things were news. It's one thing to go ahead and put stuff out there and say this is important for you to know. It's another thing to tell them why it's important for them to know, and then to hear back from the community and see if they really care or not. And I'm going to leave it at that point. So.
Thank you. Denise?
I'm Denise Cheng. I'm the Citizen Journalism Coordinator. I can't see half the room, and I'm really tempted to go like this. So I'm the Citizen Journalism Coordinator for the Rapidian, which is a hyper-local, community-powered news outlet based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So all of our content literally bubbles up from the community. It comes from people's passions. It comes from what they see in their neighborhoods every day, and they're sharing it for the benefit of the entire community. So our mission is basically a variation of that. It's basically that we want to provide the tools and training in order for people to report from the ground up, because with the sort of shrinking mediascape, that doesn't really help anybody. So we want to be able to capture some of the things that are missing. I guess my interpretation of that is that simply that news is a vehicle for civic engagement, and when people create content, they are civically engaging because they're getting to know the topic pretty thoroughly, and they're delivering it to their own networks as well as a wider network. So it not only helps them to really get involved with the topic and really care about it and speak to it, but it also creates a form of media literacy education. They now know what goes into media production, and because of that, they are also savvier consumers of news, and that's a really, really important thing in our country where we don't have media literacy education. But a lot of these things kind of tie into it, but I think at the very core of the Rapidian is this idea of civic engagement through the creation of media and through interacting with media that your neighbors and community members have created.
So I've actually spent quite a bit of time nosing around the mission statements on a lot of your sites. And it's interesting to me, we have some examples here. My panelists have sites that clearly exist in conjunction with the community. You can't separate what these folks do from the people they're serving, really. But most of you do too, it seems, have sites that mention or rely on community in some way. One of the things I think journalism needs to adapt to is a culture of experimentation and testing. Did this work? Did it resonate? Did it not? We had a great conversation in the metrics breakout session earlier about how much we can know about what's working, and are we making strategic decisions based on what we see resonates or doesn't resonate with the people we're trying to serve. In terms of what works, the answer is going to be different depending on the individual projects. It might be that attendance at in-person events is really important to you and something you want to be able to cite to funders or advertisers. It might be that that's links on and off of your site. We held a workshop at RJI last year on measuring the success of engagement efforts, and one key metric that I had never considered was outbound links. If you want to be a hub of community information, then where else you send people might be crucial, and that might be something that you could say. People came to us to get to these and found these 20 other community resources. based on interaction with us. It might be the number of partners that you have in the community. It might be people who are volunteering to help you teach community classes or showing up at classes that you offer. It might be the number of contributors or the number of pieces that you're motivating people to contribute. Whatever it is, identify what you're trying to achieve, and then over time, test what works. Build into your process, testing what works. So as we were preparing for the panel, we were cognizant of the fact that what we're talking about takes time. And as Michael said, that it's so easy to see engagement as sort of the frosting on the cake. But really, I think it's got to be built into your general approach. So as you're out reporting a story, are you gathering information that will help you keep in touch with those people? Are you going to make it easy for them to share your content? Are you getting their email address and asking if it's okay if you thank them publicly for the help that you gave them? Can you guys talk a little bit about how you make time for what the kinds of things we're talking about here? Andre?
I found that early on it was probably too much time looking back, but it was important to go ahead and make most of the time about outreach, especially using social media platforms. And it was more important to ask a question than it was to tell people that a post was up on my site. And if I was sharing a link to a post, whether it be Facebook or Twitter, it wasn't good enough just to write a one-liner that said, this is what's going on. It was more important to ask the question, or ask a question to get folks to think and then generate the conversation. And third-party apps like Livefire and Intense Debate help make that a lot easier now, because now you can pull those comments on other platforms in a way you couldn't before. We've been weird, I guess, in the fact that we've gotten a few stories in via direct message on Twitter. And so we can't really thank them in public because they gave it to us as a direct message on Twitter. But we were able to go out and break some stories from fairly large stories first, and then do some initial research, knowing that we weren't going to be the go-to at the end of the day, but as long as we could get the story out and let people and be aware what was going on, that was more important. Unfortunately, a lot of those stories were bad news stories, like layoffs at banks and businesses closing. But as a result, people in that community of people in various communities in Birmingham, because I think one thing I got away from in recent months was separating from the community, trying to figure out what we're going to do next. But being a part of that community, being kind of a snarky personality in terms of it wasn't me as the Terminal's Twitter account. It was a 110-year-old train station that got torn down as the Terminal's Twitter account. So you can make snarky comments even today, even talking with other with other news outlets. Our CBS affiliate put out a tweet this morning about hard-hitting news story about the Wing Fest coming up this weekend. And sitting up here, I was like, so how many wings were eaten in preparation for this story? And they wrote back and said, not enough. And it was that kind of conversation where someone's going to look at that and want to see why that conversation got started, much more often than watching a link that said, this is something that happened today. Or that's at least how it's happened in Birmingham.